Dr. Greg Salyer will present the secret teachings of Dead Man to us. So as I've said already, Greg is the president and CEO of the Philosophical Research Society here. He's been a teacher and administrator in higher education for 25 years and has written on mythology, Native American literature, the Bible, and postmodernism. He leads a president's class here most every Tuesday evening, and there are 2 more classes in his current series on the topic of love, women in love and men in love. So please come out for those the next 2 weeks. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Greg Salyer.
I prefer to be called nobody. If I go on too long, just shoot me and cook me up and eat me. I just want to talk about 3 things as a way to get the discussion going tonight. Mythology, technology, and capitalism and Christianity. So just some observations to get the discussion going. This is about postmodern storytelling. Postmodern storytelling, such as found in Dead Man, is laced with a kind of serious irony that plays with ideologies of mass destruction, ennui, humor, all in the same imaginative space. You know what else does that? Native American storytelling. Gerald Visner, an Anishinaabe writer and critic, talks about storytelling in the same way. Listen to this. Native American Indian stories are told and heard in motion, imagined and read over and over on a landscape that is never seen at once. Words are heard in winter rivers. Crows are written on the poplars. The last words are never the end. Jim Jarmusch is a trickster here, of course, because we are tricked in good postmodern fashion into a plot of this film that is in the end a mirror of our own susceptibility to believing in plots. Let me say that again. This is a film that tricks us into believing and foregrounds our susceptibility to belief. Dead Man is a story that warns us of the danger of believing in stories, because the stories that inform, shape, and maintain America, regardless of the century, are deadly. Lie as meaning. The most meaningful stories, or at least the stories that move people to action or travel in this film, are false. While the movement of characters proceeds via these false stories, those same stories keep people oriented in a world that is spinning toward death. The sense of falseness, of inauthenticity, is at the heart of Dead Man. It strikes the chord that many Americans fear most, the thought that in our myths and rituals we're lying to ourselves, and that we will die, recognizing that we've spent our lives in pursuit of false hopes and manufactured dreams. The film offers no consolation for these fears. On the contrary, it dramatizes them. Blake lives only to die, but the story keeps him alive long enough to die well, under the care of nobody, who sends him to his death in a canoe floating out to sea, far from Cleveland. As Blake drifts out into the river that will carry him to the ocean, to where the sky meets the water, he looks up long enough to see Cole and nobody shoot each other. Death is a presence that has traveled from Cleveland to the Pacific Northwest, but now he moves beyond it, into the mirror of the sky and water, back to where all the spirits are from, and his story and his ceremony, the lie, his life is complete, or perhaps completely finished at least. For nobody, William Blake has completed the circle back to where the spirits reside. For Blake, the adoption of the myth and the performance of the ritual have given him a death different from those around him. In living out what is factually a lie, but mythologically true, Blake finds a good way to die, or at least a different way. The advantage of train travel and print and guns are gained here in this world in a kind of Faustian exchange. For those things, we get a loss of connection to the landscape and the promulgation of lies and death. There is then a terror embedded in these technologies that the characters seem to be unaware of, or perhaps resigned to, because they're operating with a 19th century point of view. Their naivete is at times tragic, humorous, but it also seduces us into believing that we're not so naive until we get trapped at the end. And we know that we are susceptible to these same lies too. In Dead Man, technology is the machine that produces inauthenticity or falseness. It also generates death. The most immediate image of technology is that of metal. After nobody understands that the man who has white man's metal next to his heart is the poet and painter William Blake, he realizes that the Blake of the 19th century will use a gun instead of poetry and painting. You were a poet and a painter, but now you are a killer of white men. And later he declares that weapon will replace your tongue, and you will learn to speak through it, and your poetry will now be written with blood. Mr. Dickinson, owner of Dickinson's Metalworks, and I believe Mitchum's last performance, is by his own admission a killer who makes his living by producing metal. His factory dominates the aptly named town of Machine and belches black smoke into the air as the townspeople engage in various occupations surrounding death. When he first arrives in Machine, William Blake must walk a kind of gauntlet through hunters, coffin makers, and other strange and threatening people. The pervasiveness and perniciousness of white man's metal can be seen in William Blake's death walk, mirrored at the end, through Nobody's Macaw village in the Pacific Northwest, where among the representations of death there is, half buried in the ground, a metal sewing machine. It has come there. The combination of white man's metal with train travel and other technologies produces the dramatic sense of lostness that the characters display in Dead Man. I think the opening scene is brilliant because nobody's connected to each other. They just look at each other, and the train is speeding through the landscape over all the stories and the histories and the peoples who live there. And people come and go, and if you notice, a whole new group of people get on with each scene, and there is no connection. Nobody says anything. And if you've ever done train travel, you know that's exactly the way it is. In fact, it's weird if somebody does start talking to you. You don't want that to happen on a train, right? You want to be left alone, but you're all checking each other out. Sense of lostness. One of these other technologies is writing, especially print. Throughout the film, we encounter characters such as the fireman, Crispin Glover, and Conway Twill, who cannot read. Their illiteracy places them at an obvious disadvantage, but it also provides them with some benefits. Specifically, the fireman is not subject to the false hopes that define William Blake, who not only reads, but holds the same occupation as the first writers in Samaria in 2000 BCE, accountant. The fireman proclaims in regard to Blake's letter assuring him of a job that writing is untrustworthy and dangerous, a sentiment that can be found in non-writers when writing is introduced to the culture, such as indigenous people. Written lies move faster than trains in Dead Man. and they are just as unstoppable. Writing, like the other technologies represented in the film, leads to alienation and death. And there's so many scenes. Remember when William Blake tries to tear down the posters and nobody says your actions are useless, and they are. Commerce, capitalism, and Christianity. In The White Man's Indian, Robert Burkhofer writes this: ideals and interests of settlers and missionaries, policymakers, and private profit seekers were touted as compatible, even intertwined, in official statement and public propaganda, if not in practice, as we're all to discover in actual settlement. Religion subdued the natives for economic advantage and paved the way for national expansion through peaceful conquest, at the same time as it saved souls from eternal damnation. Trade and agriculture were presumed to extend national power and glory, while they also converted the heathen to Christianity. And European civilization through the social interaction of the commercial nexus. Thus, propagandists for the missionary enterprise presented arguments for the increase of trade, while the proponents of commercial advantages of colonies mentioned the desirability of spreading Christianity. We can see this in the primary sources, and it is a toxic wedding. Christianity and commerce, so often wedded in colonialisms around the world, are the driving forces that propel the characters in Dead Man toward violent death. Nobody explains that Indians get diseases from the blankets sold at the post, an all too common event across the country. The blankets were in fact infected with smallpox and other diseases, and once white Euro-Americans figured that out, they used them as weapons. They knew. And so the trader there is not being disingenuous when he says, "May I interest you in a blanket?" When nobody comes in to the trading post and the proprietor utters a prayer that Lord Jesus Christ would wipe out the Philistines off the face of the earth, nobody responds with William Blake. A William Blake line: "The vision of Christ that thou dost see is my vision's greatest enemy." He doesn't expect him to speak English, much less quote William Blake. The trading post itself, a contested site for the ideologies of the West and the practice that follow from them. The missionaries' easy blend of Christianity and capitalism seems humorous until we experience or see others experience the effects of this merger. Among these effects are the debasement of Christianity. That ammunition was blessed by the Archbishop of Detroit. The elevation of greed to virtue and the channeling of all meaning into exchange value. The film suggests that those of us who live this way are already dead men, even though we may be alive. When William Blake adopts nobody's interpretation of his own role in the world, William Blake's role in the world, he understands that he is a part of a death culture where meaning is found only in the acquisitions of goods and wealth, especially tobacco, and creativity serves the interests of extermination, not survival. We can see this most clearly, I think, when Cole Wilson comes upon the Pinkerton agent that William Blake has killed, which is his first, you remember his face in that scene. He's no longer confused. He's adopted this story. He is living out this story now. He doesn't understand it. But I'm William Blake. Do you know my poetry? It's the most horrific in the film, but it has a clear purpose. The sacred, or any image of the sacred that is not co-equal with capitalism, must be exterminated or erased because it looks like a goddamn religious icon. That kind of sacred, any other kind of sacred, must be exterminated. We wipe that image of the sacred off our boot, right? in that most powerful scene. Robert Detweiler has connected post-structuralism and postmodern storytelling to survival, and I think he's absolutely right about this. We can play around with postmodernism and post-structuralism, talk about it in very abstract terms, but I think it's ultimately about survival. He writes, survival is indeed not the subtext, but the supertext, the overtext of post-structuralism. Sacred language expresses survival, and in that very expression establishes its sacredness. Interpretation becomes an act of survival, and interpretation of the sacred texts ensures their survival and our own. Certain cultures beat the drums to make the eclipse go away, to scare off the monster that is threatening to eat the sun and maintain order of things. We beat the text. Around the campfire, while the beans are made with possum cook, stories are told that explain the world. They are full of innocence and experience and come from everywhere. Roman history, children's fables, the Bible. The scene is an ironic portrayal of a family having dinner, with the mother cooking, telling stories, and reading from the Bible. And yes, that was Iggy Pop. Nobody's comment is, as usual, stupid white man. It's a scourge. It's like when something real bad happens, like when everybody gets killed and you can't do anything about it, like a swarm of locusts. This is an apt description of the world that the characters inhabit. In fact, when Big George, Billy Bob Thornton, asks Sally to say grace before they eat the beans, Sally offers a grace that is right out of the Bible. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day into the fowls of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. That's from 1 Samuel 7. And the other men respond with a resounding amen. After Blake joins them, they gather around him and inspect him as if he is a beaver who can offer them a fine pelt. They are trappers. They comment upon his hair, clothes, and eyeglasses and show him how sharp their knife is. Blake himself hopes they will offer him something to eat, since nobody believes that he must fast in order to prepare for his return to the spirit world. But their designs are on what they can make of his body. In fact, their greed creates an argument between Big George and Benmont Tench, named for the keyboardist in Tom Petty's band, by the way. Each one says that it belongs to him. God damn it, you keep your hands off of it. Ben ends up shooting Big George, and Big George responds by declaring, I'm going to have to kill somebody now. Indeed, he points the gun at William Blake and says, well, God damn it, I guess nobody gets you. And at that moment, nobody appears. And the irony is complete. There's a scene that's a turning point in William Blake's journey, this scene, for it confirms his willingness to become William Blake, the killer of white men. He takes the test. He doesn't want to go down there. I'd really rather not go. Just go. Okay, then. He is not a hero yet. He hasn't taken the test. He hasn't descended into hell. Sally's mythologizing there. She's telling stories, but they're cut loose from any particular landscape, and they draw from biblical and historical and children's texts, as I said, but they have no meaning. They're trying to simulate a family there. And so the texts don't have any traction. They are meaningless. The only thing that means in the stories is the killing. And it's terrible or horrible. And they also understand that death is a scourge, like when everybody gets killed and you can't do anything about it. Their lives are shaped and driven by these stories, which is why they, like everybody else, make their living by killing. They are entranced by the technologies of killing, how sharp a machine can make a knife, and by the acquisitions of goods such as eyeglasses, suits, and hats that are afforded by the death of their victims, their trappers. In the midst of their rituals is a Christian grace that gives biblical sanction to their creation of death as they roam the open spaces of the American West. They are, in these senses and others, typical Americans trying to get by and relatively oblivious to the forces that are arrayed to define their lives and their deaths, not to mention how their very lives create deaths of others. The first words of the film are, "Look out the window." They seem now to serve as a fitting metaphor for viewing the film itself. As the landscape flashes by like frames of film, we speed over stories and land toward our own deaths. Dead Man asks us to look at the film and our world the way William Blake looks out the window of the train. It asks us to recognize the forces that drive us and inform us, and to understand the impossibility of living together when we do not know what we are living for, other than what has been manufactured and sold to us as true, meaningful, or profitable. This way of seeing involves great struggle and pain, and it is with great relief that we hear nobody's words to William Blake before he is sent out to the mirrors of waters to finally die. This world will no longer concern you. WTF, what did we just watch? Right? Why then should we watch this film, so full of darkness and death? Many people should not watch this film. Those who are too tired and too afraid to encounter otherness by finding the edges of America and going beyond them will do better watching many other films, Marvel. But we should at least be aware that in rejecting otherness, we reject the sacred, which comes to us in images that are awesome and fearful and reeking of death. And in rejecting otherness, we reject interpretation, the opportunity to beat the drums and scare away the monster threatening to eat the sun. If, as Robert Detweiler says, interpretation is an act of survival, then we need more films like Dead Man, which demands interpretation and allows us no refuge in the shelters of mass-produced meaning and technology. In making these demands upon us, Dead Man forces us to face the ultimate otherness of death. It is only then, after the encounter with death, that we can say that this world will no longer concern us. Thank you.